Welcome to the Echoes of Ihsan podcast. Today we're going on a deep dive, into Sunan Abu Dawud, Book 13, Tribute, Spoils, and Rulership.
Okay.
It's a really fascinating book. It's all about governance, wealth, and justice, within Islamic society.
Yeah.
And it offers some timeless wisdom that's so relevant even today.
Yeah, it's a really important book. It's got tons of knowledge about leadership and stuff, how to allocate resources, and just thinking about the ethics of wealth and power.
Yeah, for sure. I'm really curious, as we go through this book about what actually makes a good leader. What are the qualities? What kind of challenges do they have to deal with? And how do they balance, having authority with being responsible?
Yeah, that's a great question. Why don't we start with Hadith 2926?
Okay.
This one really emphasizes how important it is to have sincere advisors for good governance.
So it's not enough to just have advisors. They have to be people who will actually give you honest feedback.
Yeah, exactly.
Keep you accountable.
And the Prophet knew leadership can be pretty lonely, and it's really easy to fall into the traps of power,
Right.
even if you have good intentions.
Right.
So you need people around you who will tell you the truth, even when it's hard. Imagine a captain of a ship.
Okay.
They need a really good navigator.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they could steer the ship in the wrong direction, even if they're a good captain.
I get it. So having those honest advisors is like having a good navigator.
Right.
Keeps you on course.
Mm-hmm.
That makes total sense. This makes me think about, leaders today.
Uh-huh.
Do they have people around them who make them think critically and question what they believe? Or are they just surrounded by people who agree with everything they say?
That's a really important point. Advisors who are honest, they can help prevent groupthink. And they can help leaders see their blind spots,
Right.
And that helps them make decisions that are actually good for the people they're leading. They help them stay connected to what's really going on.
Yeah, that's so important. So this kind of leads us to Hadith 2927, right?
Yeah.
Where the Prophet is giving advice to Qadam about the dangers of being a leader.
Right. He tells Qadam, you'll be successful if you die without ever having been a leader.
Wow.
It's pretty intense, right? But it shows how heavy that responsibility is and how easy it is to be tempted when you have power.
So it's leadership is super important for any society to function.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it can be really tricky to stay righteous when you're in that position.
Exactly. Leadership isn't about getting more for yourself or getting a higher status. It's about serving people and being just. The Prophet, patient, is warning us that if you want to be a leader for the wrong reasons, you might end up compromising your morals and spirituality.
Right. So how do you balance that? How do we serve others without losing ourselves?
That's where having good intentions, constantly checking yourself, and having a strong connection with Allah come in. Leaders have to genuinely want to serve, not just be driven by ego or ambition. They need to be humble and get advice from people they trust.
So it's finding that balance between serving the community and making sure you're okay spiritually, leading with wisdom and compassion, remembering that real leadership is about service and sacrifice.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe we should move on to another important part of the book, how wealth is acquired and distributed in an Islamic society. Hadith 2928 is a great example. It's a story about this guy who was offering camels as an incentive for people to convert to Islam, and then he started having second thoughts about it.
Oh, wow. That's a tough one. What did the Prophet Badu say to him?
So the Prophet Badu is really insightful in his response. He acknowledges the guy's generosity, but also reminds him that real Islam is about sincere belief, not about getting material rewards. He tells him, if you really want to give the camels, go ahead. But if you have any doubts, you have more right to them than the people you gave them to.
It reminds us that charity should be about doing good, not trying to get something in return, like recognition or social status.
Exactly. Are we giving freely and without expecting anything back? Or are we hoping for something, whether it's people praising us, tax breaks, or even feeling morally superior?
Yeah, that's something to really think about.
Yeah.
Now, in Hadiths 2930 and 2931, the focus shifts to the responsibility of those collecting zakat, which is such a central part of Islam. It's about taking care of people and making sure wealth is shared.
Yeah, and the Prophet was very clear about the consequences of misusing or stealing from zakat funds. He said that people who collect zakat properly are like those who are fighting in the path of Allah.
Wow.
It shows you how much trust is put in the people who handle money for the community. And it emphasizes that wealth that's supposed to benefit the community has to be managed with honesty and transparency.
It's not just about collecting the zakat, right?
Right.
It's about making sure it goes to those who actually need it, using it to help people out of poverty, support those who are struggling, and create a fairer society.
Absolutely. And this principle applies to any kind of public funds and resources. Hadiths 2939, 2941, and 2942 talk about the same idea. They're about how public resources should be used properly and condemn people who use their positions for personal gain.
So the Prophet, though, was warning against those in authority using their positions to get rich, emphasizing that they have to put the community's well-being first.
Exactly. Hadith 2943 puts it perfectly. It describes leaders as stewards of resources, not owners. They're entrusted with distributing these resources fairly, meeting the needs of the people, not their own desires.
That's a really powerful image, especially these days when we see so much abuse of power in public funds.
It's a reminder that real leadership is about service, accountability, and taking care of the people you lead.
Now let's dive into something that often causes a lot of discussion, the Prophet's own inheritance.
This is where things get a bit more complex, but also really insightful about the Prophet's per book character and the principles of Islamic leadership.
So Hadiths 2944, 2961, and 2963 shed light on this. The big question is, what happened to the Prophet's belongings after he passed away?
These hadiths tell us that his possessions were treated like sadaqah, charitable giving, and not like a personal inheritance.
Okay.
They were meant to benefit the Muslim community, not to make his family rich. This shows how incredibly selfless the Prophet was and how much he cared about the well-being of the ummah.
So it goes against the idea that leadership in Islam is about getting more wealth or power for yourself. It's about service, sacrifice, and putting the community's needs first, just like the Prophet did.
Absolutely. Hadith 2938 really emphasizes this too. The Prophet, declares he's responsible for the debts and dependents of Muslims who have passed away.
Wow.
He takes on the role of protector and provider for the most vulnerable people, making sure they're taken care of even after their loved ones are gone.
That's amazing. And then we have Hadiths 2966 and 2967. These tell the story of Fatima, the Prophet's daughter, asking for her inheritance and how the caliphs responded. This is a sensitive topic, so we need to be careful and remember the historical context.
Totally. These hadiths have been interpreted in different ways, but the main point remains the same: leadership in Islam isn't about enriching yourself, but about serving the community. The caliph's decisions were based on their understanding of the Prophet's teachings and their duty to uphold Islamic governance.
It's a good reminder that even the Prophet's closest companions faced tough decisions and had to figure out how to apply Islamic principles. And sometimes they didn't all agree. It shows how dynamic Islamic law is and how important it is to keep having respectful conversations and studying.
Yeah, for sure. These discussions and debates help us understand Islam better and show how flexible its principles can be while staying true to its core values.
This feels like a good place to pause for now. We've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive.
Yeah, definitely.
We've been talking about what makes a good leader, the temptations of power, and the ethical side of wealth, and how it's shared in an Islamic society.
Right. We've seen how the Prophet's own example is like a guide for us, showing us the way to live a just and compassionate life.
Join us for part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll keep exploring Sunan Abu Dawud, Book 13. We've got more fascinating stories and teachings to uncover.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Sunan Abu Dawud, Book 13, Tribute, Spoils, and Rulership. We've been exploring these deep principles of leadership, wealth, and justice, within Islamic society, learning from the Prophet's example and the teachings from this amazing text.
Yeah, it's been so interesting unpacking these concepts and seeing how they connect to our lives today. In this part, I'm really curious about how these ideals actually worked in the Prophet's time. What lessons can we learn from those real-world examples?
Let's look at some hadiths that shed light on the social and financial dynamics of that early Muslim community. Like hadiths 3074 and 3075 talk about a situation where immigrant women in Medina were having trouble finding housing.
Oh, interesting. So even back then, they had to deal with social welfare and making sure resources were allocated fairly. It reminds us that creating a just and equitable society is an ongoing process, right? You always have to pay attention to the needs of those who are struggling.
Exactly. The Prophet, didn't just talk about compassion and justice, he actively tried to meet the practical needs of his community. Like Hadith 374 tells us he ordered that the houses of the immigrants should be given to their wives.
So he was making sure that families had stable homes and that women's needs were specifically taken care of.
Right. It's a beautiful example of leadership in action, putting the well-being of families first and addressing the needs of those who might be overlooked. It shows the importance of understanding the unique challenges women face and ensuring they have access to essential resources.
Yeah, I see that. Now, Hadith 3075 brings up something that's a bit puzzling at first. It quotes Mu'adh ibn Jabal, a close companion of the Prophet, as saying, "He who put the necklace of jizya in his neck abandoned the way," followed by the apostle of Allah, Abu.
Right.
What does that even mean, putting the necklace of jizya on one's neck? It sounds like a metaphor.
It is a metaphor. It refers to a Muslim choosing to live as a dhimmi, which means a non-Muslim citizen living under Islamic rule. They're subject to paying jizya, a tax in exchange for protection and being exempt from military service. Muad ibn Jabal's statement suggests that a Muslim choosing this path was somehow going against the Prophet's vision.
That seems a bit counterintuitive, though. Why would a Muslim living under Islamic rule and benefiting from his protection be seen as straying from the Prophet's path?
We have to remember the historical context. Islam was still a new faith at that time, and there was a strong emphasis on unity and having a shared identity among Muslims. So, choosing to live as a dhimmi, even though it offered some protection and religious freedom, might have been seen as separating oneself from the Muslim community and its goals.
So it wasn't about putting down non-Muslims or the idea of jizya itself. It was more about emphasizing the importance of maintaining a strong Muslim identity and actively participating in the growth of the Muslim community.
Exactly. It was about choosing to be part of the collective effort to build a just and equitable society based on Islamic principles. Hadiths 3076 and 3078 explore this concept further.
What do those hadiths say?
Well, Hadith 3076 tells a story about Abu Darda, another companion of the Prophet, Pubi. He heard the Prophet say, if anyone takes land by paying its jizya, he renounces his immigration, and if anyone takes off the disgrace of an unbeliever from his neck, he turns away his back from Islam. This refers to a Muslim acquiring land subject to jizya and choosing to live and work under non-Muslim authorities, even within an Islamic state.
So the Prophet Puba is comparing this to renouncing one's immigration, which was a huge decision for early Muslims who left their homes and families to join him in Medina. It really underscores the weight of choosing to live outside the Muslim community.
Right. And the phrase takes off the disgrace of an unbeliever from his neck adds another layer of meaning. Some scholars see it as emphasizing the need for Muslims to maintain their distinct identity. Others interpret it as highlighting the aspiration for leadership and influence within society, rather than accepting a subordinate position.
It's like Muslims are encouraged to be active shapers of society, using their skills and resources to make things better, not just passively living under someone else's rule.
Exactly. It's about striving for excellence and positive change within the framework of Islamic values. Then you have Hadith 3078, which further reinforces the idea of limited protected lands, even for people of other faiths. It mentions that the Prophet protected Naki, a specific place, but then clarified that there is no permission for protected land except for Allah Most High.
So even when land is designated as protected, it ultimately belongs to Allah, and how it's used is determined by His will and Islamic law. It reminds us that our control over resources isn't absolute, and we have a responsibility to care for the earth.
Now, maybe we can shift our focus to another interesting aspect of wealth and resources in Islamic society, buried treasure.
Buried treasure. That sounds like something straight out of an adventure story. What do the hadiths have to say about that?
Hadith 3079 addresses this directly. The Prophet Fubu said, a fifth is payable on buried treasure. This means that even hidden wealth is subject to the rules of Islamic finance and the obligation to contribute to the well-being of the community.
Wow, so even if you stumble upon hidden riches, you still have a responsibility to share them and help those in need. That's pretty amazing.
It shows how comprehensive Islamic teachings are when it comes to managing wealth and resources. It's about recognizing that all wealth ultimately comes from Allah and that we're entrusted with using it in a way that benefits everyone. Hadith 3081 provides another great anecdote that gives us more insight into the Prophet's financial practices and his unwavering commitment to ethical conduct.
I love these personal stories. What happened in this one?
Well, it's about Al-Makad, a companion of the Prophet, who found a mouse taking dinars out of a hole. He gathered the dinars and brought them to the Prophet, urging him to accept them as sadaqah, a charitable donation.
That's really kind of him. He wanted to make sure that unexpected wealth was used for a good purpose.
It is. But the Prophet, asked him if he had actually reached into the hole to get the dinars. Al-Miqdad said no, and the Prophet, Buh, replied, "May Allah bless you in it," allowing Al-Miqdad to keep the dinars.
So even though it was a good deed to offer the money as tzedakah, the Prophet mm, recognized the importance of how the wealth was acquired. Al-Muta didn't try to exploit the situation to get this wealth, so he was allowed to keep it.
It's a powerful lesson, especially today when the pursuit of wealth often leads people to make unethical choices. This hadith reminds us that true blessings come from wealth that's earned honestly and used for good.
Yeah, it makes you think about your own financial choices and whether you're compromising your values or taking advantage of others in your pursuit of wealth.
Now, let's finish this part of our deep dive with a hadith that gives us a glimpse into the historical context of the Prophet's time. It sheds light on the concept of sacred spaces and the consequences of violating them.
I'm always fascinated by how even simple stories from the Prophet's time can reveal so much about faith, morality, and what it means to be human.
Right. Hadith 3082 tells the story of the Prophet and his companions passing by a grave while on an expedition to At-Kahif. The Prophet, Pabul, identifies the grave as belonging to Abu Rigal and explains that he had sought sanctuary in the sacred mosque.
Ah, so he was seeking protection in a designated sacred space. That's a concept that exists in many cultures and religions.
Exactly, but when he left that sanctuary, he met the same fate as his people, who were punished at that location. The Prophet, Bu, then reveals that a golden bough was buried with him.
It's interesting that even in this story about a grave and a golden bough, there are deeper meanings about the nature of sanctuary, the consequences of leaving protected spaces, and maybe even the lasting allure of material wealth, even in death.
Absolutely. These historical stories might seem simple on the surface, but they hold layers of meaning that invite us to think about deeper spiritual and ethical principles. We've covered a lot in this part, from social welfare and ethical leadership to the nuances of jizya and the significance of sacred spaces.
It's been an amazing journey exploring the complexities of life in that early Muslim community. I'm excited to continue our exploration in the final part of our deep dive.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Sunan Abu Dawud, Book 13, Tribute, Spoils, and Rulership.
It's been a fascinating journey, really exploring the depths of governance, wealth, and justice in Islamic society. These hadiths are like a treasure chest of wisdom, timeless, but also so relevant to how we live today.
Absolutely. We've uncovered some really deep insights into what makes a righteous leader, and the ethics of wealth and power, and that balance between individual responsibility and the well-being of the whole community. As we wrap up our deep dive, I'm curious, what are some of the themes that really stood out to you?
Yeah, one of the biggest takeaways for me has been that constant emphasis on what true leadership means in Islam. It's not about personal gain or climbing the ladder. It's about service, being accountable, and a deep commitment to the well-being of the community.
Yeah, I totally agree. The hadiths we've looked at, they paint such a clear picture of the Prophet Muhammad's leadership style. So much humility, compassion, and a genuine desire to uplift everyone around him.
And his focus on seeking wise counsel, surrounding himself with people who would give him honest feedback, and resisting the temptations of power. That's such a powerful model for leaders in every aspect of life, really.
Definitely. And these principles are even more important today when we see so many leaders using their positions for personal gain or holding on to power instead of serving the people.
These hadiths remind us that real leadership is about empowering others, working together, and making sure decisions are made in the best interest of the community.
Another thing that really struck me was the focus on how wealth is acquired and distributed ethically. The hadiths make it so clear that wealth itself isn't good or bad. It's a test from Allah, and it's all about how we get it, manage it, and use it.
The stories about zakat, the fifth, even the Prophet's own inheritance, they all highlighted how important it is to align our financial practices with Islamic principles, making sure wealth is used to help those in need, support the vulnerable, and create a more just and equitable society.
And it goes beyond just avoiding haram income, right? It's about being aware of how we spend, how much we give to charity, and the overall effect our financial decisions have on the community.
The hadiths about cultivating barren land, investing in productive endeavors, and using our resources to benefit others were really inspiring to me. It's a reminder that wealth can be such a powerful tool for creating opportunities, encouraging innovation, and contributing to a prosperous society.
Yeah, for sure. These teachings encourage us to see wealth as more than just a way to get rich personally. It's a way to uplift others and make positive change in the world.
The stories about the Prophet's own financial practices, they were so insightful. His simplicity, his humility, his reliance on Allah. It's a challenge to the materialistic values we often see in society today. They remind us that true wealth isn't about how much stuff you have, but about your connection with the divine and your service to others.
I completely agree. It's like an antidote to that consumerist culture that surrounds us. A reminder that real fulfillment comes from living a life with purpose, meaning, and connection to something bigger than ourselves.
The hadiths about jizya and interacting with non-Muslims brought up some important points, especially with all the complexities of interfaith relations today. They highlighted the importance of justice, fairness, and respecting the rights of people from different faiths.
Right. These teachings encourage us to build understanding and work towards peaceful coexistence, recognizing the dignity of every human being, no matter what their religious beliefs are.
It's important to acknowledge that some of these hadiths, especially those dealing with complex issues like jizya and governance, have been interpreted in different ways throughout history.
You're right. We have to approach these texts with humility, acknowledging the historical context and consulting with knowledgeable scholars to truly understand their nuances and implications.
This deep dive has been such a valuable learning experience, and I'm so thankful for the opportunity to explore these teachings. It's left me with a deeper appreciation for the wisdom within Islamic traditions and a better understanding of how these principles can guide us towards a more just, compassionate, and fulfilling life.
I'm so glad to hear that. Sunan Abu Dawud, Book 13, Tribute, Spoils, and Rulership. It's a book filled with knowledge that can illuminate our path and inspire us to strive for excellence in every area of our lives. It's been a pleasure exploring these teachings with you.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through these Islamic texts and traditions. May Allah grant us the wisdom and guidance to apply these timeless principles in our lives and make the world a better place.